Marianna, welcome
Hi,
to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So first things first, love if you would give the audience a brief introduction about you, like where you are in the world today, and just a little bit about you to start this off.
Sure. My name is Marianna Sachse. I am the founder of Jackalo, which is a line of durable and sustainable playwear for kids and women. And I live in the Netherlands. I moved here about 3 years ago with my husband and then at that time, one kid, and we had another kid right after we moved. So I've got a 3-year-old son and a 10-year-old son and a 13-year-old dog. And yeah, I'm enjoying life in the Netherlands.
Amazing. So did you move there with your husband, or was that like a family decision to try something different? How'd you end up in the Netherlands?
Yeah, we were at a point where we wanted to try something different, and it was kind of kismet that we were feeling like, okay, we want to look for the next opportunity that's going to take us abroad. And my husband was at that time approached by a Dutch company, and they approached him, reticently, like you might approach someone in the United States who has a family, and they said, well, do you need to check with your wife to see if she'd be interested? And he's like, no, I know she's going to be interested in this. And he told me that this was a possibility. And I was like, yes, let's do this.
That's awesome. Awesome. Where are you originally from?
I'm from Washington, D.C.
Gotcha.
Actually in the city. So I grew up, metro access in DC in the 80s, and spent a childhood there that's kind of typical 1980s childhood, where kids were kind of running free in the neighborhood. And so I learned to love freedom at that age. And that's a big part of what I incorporate into what I do with Jackalo. So with Jackalo, I really want kids to be able to play freely, like we did in the 80s. And I see so many parents who struggle with that and struggle with letting their kids climb and run and play and feeling like everything has to be perfectly safe. And I want to tell parents, no, just let your kids have fun. Doesn't matter what they do in terms of like ruining their clothes. If you have the right things, they'll hold up. And so I really wanted to, connect to that old time feeling of letting kids have a lot of freedom in their lives.
That's cool. Yeah, we were in DC 2 weeks ago, not this last weekend, but the weekend before. My brother, sister-in-law, and niece, and my sister and brother-in-law all live in DC.
Okay.
In DC as well, in Northeast.
Yeah.
And I should give you a congratulations, since we're recording this in mid-November, and your world champion nationals. Very exciting.
Oh, yeah.
We were actually there for the parade.
Nice. Lucky you.
It was pretty cool. Yeah, it's very cool. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
So let's kick off the interview a little bit further. So
Sure.
First question is, what is something that you nerd out about that you'd like to share with the audience?
So I think the biggest thing I nerd out about is making and fixing things. So I've always been a maker since the time I was really young, but recently I've really dug into figuring out, just how to do whatever it is I want to do. So I was reading a recipe that called for preserved lemons, and I don't know where I can get them. Why don't I just figure out how to make them? And I'm always doing things like that. So I make my own sauerkraut, and my husband as a gift got me a couple of wool fleeces, and now I'm learning how to process raw wool fleeces. And
Wow.
My husband jokes that if you ever wanted to have someone with you in the apocalypse, it would be me, because I nerd out on all of those things. Like, okay, let's build it. Let's figure it out.
That's funny. So I don't know if you watch The Walking Dead, but the whole premise is that the world is basically gone and there's zombies,
Yeah.
and they wander around the Atlanta area. So you're the person who can create like the blankets, the shelters, the weapons, and all that, and all those things. That's so
I don't know
interesting.
about weapons, but blankets and shelters, sure, I can create
Blankets and
that.
shelters, perfect. Those are important too. So what's the value for you? Is it the process of creation, or do you like seeing the finished output? Like, what gets you geeked up about that?
It's all of it, honestly. So I love the meditative aspect of creating, that, there's the mental gymnastics of figuring out how to do something, but oftentimes once you know what the process is, it's very meditative. So whether it's knitting or cooking something, sauerkraut is really therapeutic because you spend a lot of time punching cabbage. There's so many things like that the moments of doing it are moments where you can really get centered, and it is really meditative. And then the finished product, having something where you can say, I made this. And also giving it to people. Like I learned how to make sauerkraut because my aunt loves it and loves to have it at Thanksgiving. And I was like, well, why do we have to keep buying the canned stuff? If she really likes it, I bet she'd really like something homemade. So why don't I learn how to do it? There's tons of cabbage.
That's cool. I think this is the first time on the podcast that somebody's used the term punching cabbage.
I think it's a new term. We have to make it a big thing now.
I love that.
I love it.
That's great. What do you nerd out about? I nerd out about punching cabbage. I love that.
Cabbage.
Well, I'm really excited for the audience to hear more about the business later, because it seems like this is what you nerd out about is very aligned to what you actually do for a career as well. So yeah. It's gonna be exciting to hear about that. Well, thanks for sharing all that. The next question I have for you is, what is something that is inside of your comfort zone that might be outside of somebody else's comfort zone? And I'm going to caveat with besides punching cabbage, because you've already told us that you like doing that. And that is something I don't know that a lot of people would be comfortable doing, or maybe they would. I don't be a little strange for me, but yeah. So
it's along those lines. It's fixing things. So I was not raised by DIYers in the home space, like in the creative and crafting space, yes. But in terms of home repair and fixing things, that's not something I was raised with. I was raised in a call the plumber sort of family.
Mm-hmm.
And
me too.
When I graduated from college, I moved into a typical DC group house, which is 5 young professionals living together. And I was essentially the super. The house was owned by my cousin, and he had been renting it out to lots of different people. And it was getting further away from people he knew. And he was like, well, why don't you come in, manage the house, and just make sure everything's going okay? And so I was the one who was making decisions at 22 about whether we needed to call the plumber or not. And so I found that I really enjoyed taking apart a disposal and figuring out how to fix it, repairing toilets and things like that. So it's a little bit unusual and outside of what I would have expected for myself growing up. But it's something that I really enjoy. And I take great pride in the fact that twice when I have called plumbers and then called to cancel, because I'd fixed it myself, they've offered me jobs on the spot.
That's amazing.
I don't actually feel like becoming a plumber, but it's really nice to know that I could if I needed to.
Did you wear the belt?
I don't have a tool belt. I do not, but I do have a Leatherman. And yeah, I would wear the Leatherman on my belt just for fun.
Nice. That's cool. What, really quickly, curious, what did you go to school for?
So I went to school for anthropology. My undergrad, I did anthropology with a focus on archaeology. And so it's a bit far from what I do now. But that did contribute to my kind of DIY sense of okay, I can fix this. I can learn how to do this myself. There's a lot of archaeology that is, on the ground, literally in the trenches, figuring out, what things mean and how to make things work, how to put pieces together. And so that it's far from what I do now, but it's a big part of who I am. And, as a set of anthropology, anthropology is really all about understanding people and studying how societies operate. And that was a really good foundation for where I spent the first 20 years of my career, which was in public health and social work. And so I got a master's degree in both of those things at the University of Michigan. And that's a big part of this perspective that I have
Mm-hmm.
around repairing the world, changing the world, making it a better place. And it really undergirds everything that I do with my business.
Yeah, and I love all that. I was thinking, I'm like, did she have like an engineering degree, or did you take shop class in I don't even know if they had shop class in DC in high school.
Did not.
They did.
They did
Yeah,
not.
they.
I think that's the biggest missed opportunity. I feel like all schools should have home ec and shop in a non-gendered way, because when you don't have those things, unless you have a parent who's teaching you those skills, then you're missing out on the basic skills for like how to be a self-sufficient adult. That you don't have to buy absolutely everything you need. There's so much that you can make and so much that you can learn to make without a lot of trouble. I mean, yes, there's lots of courses online and lots of like YouTube videos, but there's nothing that compares to someone sitting down and really showing you the ropes. And from a kind of shop perspective, I definitely feel like I missed out on that. And maybe if I had that, I would have gone to engineering school. It's something that I
Mm.
feel like actually quite aligns with who I am and what I do. I really nerd out on that type of thing, and I've got a couple of friends who are engineers and product designers, and I'm the one who sits down and is like, "Okay, I want to pick your brain about how you do this."
Oh, it's so fascinating. Yeah, I went to school in the suburb of St. Paul,
Okay,
Minnesota, and we
yeah,
definitely had shop class, and it was fun. Power tools and uh, making little cars and projects and such. So let's look at
I'm
the opposite
jealous.
side. Yeah, yeah. And by the way, my wife went to Ohio State.
Okay.
I went
Uh
to Minnesota,
oh.
right? And my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, went to Michigan for her master's degree.
Oh, you
So my
guys have
wife
a
went to
house
Ohio State.
divided.
We have a house divided. My wife and I are big college football fans, and we celebrated Minnesota celebrated the biggest victory in pretty much the history of the program on Saturday against Penn State.
Okay.
And but yeah, my mother-in-law is not a college football fan, but so it's still funny like to give her some grief
For a
about
little
that
plaque
going to
about that,
Michigan.
yeah.
Yeah, like it's not really
Mhm.
for those of you who don't really know, Ohio State and Michigan is the biggest college football rivalry in the country, and it's
Yeah.
Bedlam. It's always the last game of the season in the Big Ten.
Yep.
So let's move to the other side of that question. So, what is something that's outside of your comfort zone that's likely inside of somebody else's comfort zone?
Yeah. Well, I really try to be a growth mindset person, and I really believe that everybody, has the capacity to learn and develop. And I feel like it's not. I think comfort zone is the right framing. I think a lot of times people will think about it as like talents or something like that, and a comfort zone suggests like that there's a lot of learning that can be done, and it could go from being outside your comfort zone to inside your comfort zone. Um, and for me, the thing that just really doesn't come naturally to me that I do have to work at is doing calculations in my head. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
a pen and paper person, and I write down every calculation I need to do. And I'm okay with that. Like I don't feel like, handicapped because I can't do complex calculations in my head. But my husband is someone who's really good at that. And so I'm always like, how do you do that? And I think some of it is how he was taught math, that
Mm-hmm.
different ways of teaching math teach you to do calculations in your head more efficiently. And I was not taught math in that way. And I'm really grateful that my son, my older son, as he's getting into more complicated math, I see that they're teaching him ways that will help him do that in his head so it is more natural.
Mm. My guess is that you are a measure twice, cut once kind of person.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Learned that the hard way as I've done. I make a little bit of furniture. It's not nothing fancy, but learned that the hard way when you mess up a nice piece of wood, or I'm sure when
Yeah.
when you're making clothes and you miss by a quarter inch, like the piece is ruined and you have to go back and cut a whole new piece. So
Yep. That is true.
gotcha. So next question. You get the chance to give a 5-minute speech to the world, broadcast globally. You get to stand at the podium and deliver anything that you want the world to hear. Love to hear about what your message would be and why.
Sure. I mean, this is like the TED talk of my dreams. So I think my TED talk of my dreams would be really around the way we view consumption, particularly around children's clothes. Because I think as adults, oftentimes you do the calculations differently for the things that you need. But there's a bit of a sense for kids that a good parent provides them with a lot. And a lot of times that looks like more stuff. It looks like more toys, more clothes, without really a care for how those things are produced and the lessons that teaches our children. And so for me, it would really be about essentially conscious consumption, that I really encourage all families and all individuals that when you're making a purchase, first assess whether you really need it. And then if you determine that you really do need it, can you make it? And if you can't make it, can you really look into the values of the company that's producing it? Are they caring for the planet? Are they caring for people? And really ensuring that you are voting with your dollars and supporting companies that are trying to change the way we do business.
Yeah, my wife and I, we've lived in New York we've lived in New York for 15 years separately, 13 years together. And, we've always tried to live fairly minimal. We've had small apartments. And then when you have a child come into the family, like we do, we also have a 3.5-year-old. You learn very quickly that they don't care about minimal living. Like every time we go to the store, can I have one treat? Can I have one toy? So we've actually had to get tighter on that. We've been admittedly not so good about saying no to those things. So being admittedly tighter on like, you don't need that toy. You don't need this extra little thing. You've got a whole pile of books. You don't need that one more book.
Right.
And when you were saying that, it brought up something for me that I think would be, curious for me, but also for the audience. There's a lot of noise out there about sustainability and
Yeah.
companies having these corporate initiatives. How do we as the consumers actually weed through, to be honest with you, some of it feels to me like corporate speak that has to be done. Like
Yes.
how is there a way, like how would you advise us to actually be able to vet companies out to actually know if they're following sustainable practices and doing things like what Jackalo is doing, which I know is a sustainable company? How do we actually know as a consumer?
Yeah. So some of it is going to be looking at the entire gestalt of the company. Gestalt's an annoying word, but really looking at the big picture. So if it's a company that I don't mean to pick on one company, but I'm going to pick on H&M because I think they're a really good
Mm-hmm.
example. So
Mm-hmm.
H&M is a huge company. Their prices are artificially low. They sit on boards of groups that are focused on sustainability, and they have a line of clothes that are made from organic cotton. And so, because they have one line of clothes that are made from organic cotton, they put themselves out there as a sustainable company. But they're really not, because so much of what they produce is not sustainably produced. Their prices are set so that they are really not creating a living wage for the people who are making the clothes. There and there's so many companies like this where the pieces aren't in place for for people and the planet all along the way to be valued. You can't value people and planet when the cost of a shirt is $3, and like they'll mark down to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that either they're not making money if they're having a markdown price that low, which is unlikely. But really what it means is that the people who have their hands on an item make so little. So there's an estimate that with a pair of jeans, 100 hands have touched it before it gets into your closet. And that's not talking
Wow.
about into the retailers. It's talking about like all of the people who have a hand in making that clothing item, from harvesting the cotton to ginning it, to spinning it into a thread, to weaving it, dyeing it, sewing it, finishing it. All of these have people who are touching the product. And each of them along the way is not being paid well if that item is not priced appropriately. So when you're
Hmm.
getting a $20 pair of jeans and you're thinking you've gotten a good deal, maybe you're thinking, oh, well, it's marked down. And so the company's making less off of that. That's,
Hmm.
yeah, they are making less off of that, but they've priced it so that they can mark it down. They've
Yeah.
priced it so that they're buying the products as cheap as possibly. They're having them made as cheap as possibly. So when I talk to other families about what does it look like to support a sustainable brand? I mean, number one, the very first and easiest thing is that there's a person there who's going to answer your questions and answer them honestly. So if you go to an H&M, who's going to talk to you about
Yeah.
their sustainability practices and really how sustainable it is? Nobody. They don't know the answers. Um,
I
whereas
just,
if you,
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about in New York City, if you go to an Old Navy or an H&M and you ask an employee a question about anything, it's unlikely they're actually going to answer anything for you. Like they don't know
yeah,
anything other than they're just there to stock the shelves and make sure that there's, fights aren't breaking out. Yeah, there's nobody to answer those questions.
you're lucky if they're going to tell you that the color looks terrible on you. They're not going to be
Exactly.
able to tell you anything about how the product was made and where it was made.
Yeah.
So you do want to look for some element of transparency. Are they telling you where they got the fabric from? Are they telling you where the product was sewn? Patagonia is a great example of this. They list on their website all of the factories that make their clothes, and you can find out lots of information about the fabric that they source. Um, so I would say start with transparency. That's a really, really good first step. And then from transparency, you can dig down and learn more because there are elements of transparency that are like, okay, it's nice that you shared that, but really, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Um, and so, it's helpful to know a little bit about certifications. There are multiple certifications for fair trade. A lot of places won't get certifications with good reason, because certifications can be very expensive and cost prohibitive for a small brand. And in places that have higher employment standards, like the United States, like much of Europe, they just don't do it. They don't do fair trade certification because the employment standards are high. It doesn't make sense
Hmm.
to do that added level of certification.
Hmm.
And then when it comes to the fabric, I always encourage people to buy natural fabrics wherever possible. Number one, with your clothes, you're going to be a little less sweaty if you're wearing cotton than if you're
Hmm.
wearing polyester. Polyester is a petroleum based product, and it is a non renewable resource. So if you must buy polyester, buy it from a source that's using recycled content, whether it's recycled from other clothes or from ocean plastic.
Mm.
But I always suggest save that for the items that need to be washed very little, because polyester
Hmm.
sheds microplastics and that ends up in the
Okay.
ocean. So I say, yes, go for the recycled polyester for your outerwear, for your bags, and for your shoes. You're not going to wash those things very often. But for anything that you wash regularly, go for natural fibers. Cotton, modal's really nice. Tencel is made from eucalyptus that's sustainably harvested,
Hmm.
and wool, hemp. All of those things are great. Cotton uses a ton of water and is very, very pesticide dependent if it's conventional. So it's quite a dirty crop unless you're getting organic. And in that case, you want to look for organic certifications like GUTS or IVN Best.
Gotcha.
It's
Well,
a
thanks
lot.
for sharing.
There's a ton going on in this space, and there is a ton of
Yeah.
greenwashing. And so I really say, start with that transparency and then dig down.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for the reframe on that. I personally learned a ton there that this is not a space that I know a lot about. I will be sure to connect with you after we finish the interview and make sure that if there's any links you'd like to include in the show notes, I'm sure other people listening will have questions about all that. We'll be sure to include them in the show notes.
Yep.
So this is a great lead in to kind of the meat of the interview. And love to just hear about your journey to today, and just share with us, share with the audience anything you'd like to about, you know, how we ended up here today. Anything that you know, like pivotal moments for you, or just anything that you'd like to share with us about your life.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think as you can hear from the things I nerd out on, and then the things I just nerded out on, um, there are really two parts to me. The first part is this third generation maker part. My mom made everything. She sewed, she knit, she cooked. My grandmother was the same way. I think a lot of people lost that making culture at some point in their family history. Mine really maintained that. And so I learned all of these things from a young age, and it was a really big part of who I was. I even made my high school graduation dress, and did
Wow.
knit sweaters on commission when I was in my 20s. And then there's this academically inclined part of me where I went to school for public health and social work and was really focused on learning and understanding how you make the world a better place. Like, not just what it looks like, but how do you get there? And for a long time, I kept these two parts of me very separate, that I would go to work in public health during the day and contemplate big problems and work on tricky issues and make change. And then I would go home and knit a sweater, make a quilt, make sauerkraut. Um, and those two parts of myself really didn't meet. Um, and then after having kids, I really felt like, I think almost any parent can relate to this, that when you have kids, some of your hobbies go out the window. And I just couldn't find time to make things in the way that I wanted to, because I would come home from work and do that second shift of parenting and be too tired to do the thing that really filled my bucket. And I lost a lot of that. And I
Hmm.
felt a real lack. And I did have a period in my life after when my son was about 2 years old, where my mother was sick and dying, and I had a health struggle as well. And that really put everything in perspective for me, that I felt like what I really miss in my life is the making and the truly creative pursuit. And I need to find a way to work that into a central part of my life. And
Hmm.
so that took some time to get there, to figure out exactly what that was. But where that came together is Jackalo, that we are all about that creative pursuit of making, and about really creating social change in how we buy and consume children's clothes.
Where the what's the name? Where does the name Jackalo come from?
So Jackalo is actually a children's playground song in Great Britain.
Mm,
And I picked it because I wanted something that just felt fun. Like, it's
yeah.
not something that is like known to Americans, but the rhythm of it is really playful. And to me, it was all about, does it feel light and happy and playful and fun? Um, yeah, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, no, it definitely, like when I hear the name, it's definitely like I get a sense of like what comes to mind for me is like a light blue,
Hmm,
and like a
okay.
playground. Yeah, like a light blue, like a
Yeah.
playground. And maybe it's partially because of the branding that I've seen, but that definitely makes sense for me. So in terms of Jackalo today, I'd love to hear more about kind of how the business works and who you sell to,
Yeah.
and a little bit more about you're obviously the CEO of Jackalo,
Yeah,
co-founder and CEO,
I
or
say
founder, should I say.
founder, creative director.
Creative,
I mess
yes.
with it because really at this point, Jackalo is largely me.
Hmm.
Um, that it's essentially a one woman operation right now. I outsource things with freelancers when needed, but by and large, it's my baby and it's my vision, and I'm the one that executes on it.
Hmm.
But where Jackalo is right now is that right now we're exclusively direct to consumer. I am exploring wholesale. But we produce in Portugal because I wanted to be producing close to where I live now and be
Hmm.
able to go down to the factory, see the conditions, ensure that people are treated fairly. And then we export our products, a portion of them to the United States, and a portion of them are kept here with me in the Netherlands.
Hmm.
And right now, most of our customers do come from the United States. And I think in large part that's because there's kind of a twofold reason for that. I am American and I speak in a very American way. So my writing and like branding and everything connects well with an American audience. But also, businesses start with word of mouth largely.
Hmm.
And, especially if you're a small entrepreneur like me, you're not a big venture backed company. So that word of mouth support is really powerful. And that all comes from Americans for me. And so it's really been something that's growing up in the United States, even though I am here in the Netherlands.
Hmm. What's something? So you earlier in your career, mentioned you're in public health. You were doing,
Mhm.
are you doing social work? So you'd always worked for somebody else in those roles. Were you doing your like working for an agency or the city or something like that?
Yeah, I worked with nonprofits in the beginning, both direct service nonprofits and public health foundations.
Hmm.
And then I moved into the for-profit space, working for a public interest communications firm. And so I worked with clients there who were similarly, my clients were the people that I previously worked for. So
Hmm.
foundations and nonprofits.
Got it. So is Jackalo your first foray into entrepreneurship, full time
It's actually
entrepreneurship?
not. It's
Mm,
actually not.
okay.
I have always dabbled in entrepreneurship, but this is the first time I've ever taken something seriously and said, this is my thing and I'm going to start it and make it a real company. But
Hmm.
before this, when I was in college, I would cater. Like I love to cook, so I would
Hmm.
like hire myself out as a caterer for kind of more like a private chef, I would say, private chef and small level catering for people in the DC area who needed support for an event. I had a jewelry business in college, and I did knit on commission. So those were my first tastes of entrepreneurship and the
Hmm.
idea of kind of working for yourself and setting your timeline and setting your budget. Um, but they weren't things that I had considered doing as my like real job. They were always my
Hmm.
side hustles.
Got it. So the reason I ask all this is uh, to what's been the most fun, positive, or like fun, surprising thing about starting Jackalo for you that it's been unexpected?
I would say meeting all of the families that I've met and getting to know all of the families I've gotten to know who value our products and value kind of our voice, the voice of Jackalo and what I'm trying to put out in the world, the messages I'm trying to share about family, about parenthood, about creating a better future, and how that's resonating with families as far off as New Zealand, and being able to kind of just connect with people all over the world who share similar values. That to me
Mhm.
is like the most exciting part that I really didn't expect how kind of intimate and personal the connections I was developing would be. That oftentimes in a business space you think like oh, if you're selling a product you don't really get to know your customers.
Mhm.
Um, but it's different from that because with Instagram and social networking just generally, people comment on things and you reply, and that's the beginning of a conversation. It's not just like counting likes, it's connecting with people and finding out what's interesting to them and what they're struggling with. um, I really believe in offering more than just the clothing, offering support and guidance on, all of these challenging issues for parents in these kind of modern and scary times.
Mhm.
And so it's much more than just, buy my pants. It's,
Yeah. No, that's
like,
yeah.
let's connect authentically.
Yeah, that's really fun. So I like that idea that, and I follow you on Instagram as well, and I see you get a lot of engagement. So do you, when somebody comments, do you always make it a point to go back and build that connection with them by responding or giving them some
Yeah.
value? That's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, sometimes people will just comment with an emoji, and I try to like comment with an equivalent emoji. But if they're saying anything more, then I really want to like focus and respond authentically. That
Hmm.
I don't want to respond with just thanks for your comment. I want to really take the time to understand where they're coming from and give a thoughtful response. And I think that pays off. That people remain connected, and they're more like, the aim is, yes, I do eventually want them to like support my company in terms of a purchase,
Hmm.
but more than that, I want them to like feel like they're not alone in the struggles that they're facing as parents.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do they know that they're communicating with the CEO of the company, or do they have people? Do they like? Do you make it apparent that like, hey, I'm the founder of this company, and I'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm back channeling someone, if I'm direct messaging them,
Hmm.
absolutely, I make it clear that I'm the founder. Um, I think that, I mean, Jackalo is a small enough company that you kind of just get the sense of that the more that like you engage with us, like
Hmm.
with me on Instagram. The more I'm not hiding that this is an account that's run by me, by the
Hmm.
founder. There's, especially when you're starting a company that is not a service driven company, particularly a one-on-one service driven company.
Hmm.
There's always this question of, do I say I or do I say we? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and it's it's hard to figure that out, and it's hard to figure out when you switch. Do you switch when you hire someone, or do you always use we? Um, but I felt really uncomfortable using we in most of our communications,
Hmm.
um, particularly on social media. That if I'm expressing an opinion, I try to say I as much as possible so they do see that it's a human behind this.
Hmm.
But then when I'm talking about like the philosophies behind Jackalo, what we believe in, I will use we, because I think that it's bigger than just me and the work that I'm doing. It's kind of this community that's being created. These are things that we collectively believe in. Even if you're not actually working for Jackalo, but you believe in what I'm trying to create here, and you believe in this vision, then you're part of the we. And
Yeah.
so I'll just use that.
I love the idea that you're building a community around the brand for a group of people who believe in the vision and
Yeah.
including them in your we, because it is really a movement. Like you said, the space seems to be dominated by H&Ms and Old Navies, and yeah, just a group of people out there who believe in what you're doing. That's really cool.
And there is a really nice community of people who feel this way, whether they come at it from a perspective of minimalism or they come at it from a sustainability perspective or perspective around people and caring for the humans that create the things that we need. There's a really big growing community of people who value where their products come from, the products they buy come from. I love seeing that it's getting backed up in research right now. That KPMG's last report showed a huge growth in the rise of the conscious consumer. But
Hmm.
really, what that means is that people are starting to think about where things come from, and people are starting to ask questions. And when you start talking this way, you start finding that community. You start finding the people who have been thinking about this and thinking about changing the way they do things and the way they buy things. And so it really is a community that exists that I'm, tapping into and supporting.
Perfect lead in. The next question I have for you. I'd love to hear about what's the thing that you're most proud of. And I leave this question general because you can answer it in any way or any area of your life that you would like. Or if there's more than one thing, that's great too. But yeah, what's something that you're really proud of?
I'm really proud of taking the risk to start this company. I have advanced degrees in public health, and I spent a long time working in public health, and I very easily could have stayed on that path working with foundations and nonprofits, and it's lovely and rewarding work, but it wasn't everything I needed at that time in my life. And so, like, making the decision to leave that and start something completely new that is 100% my own is something that I'm really proud of. I'm also really proud of taking the risk to move to the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people thought I was a little bit crazy because, I mean, in addition to having a 6-year-old, I was, when I moved here, I was 7 months pregnant. And I literally flew out here by myself by myself as a parent with my
Mm-hmm.
6-year-old and my dog, who is not a little dog, not a lap dog. She's a lab mix. So she was in a huge crate under the airplane flying to Amsterdam by myself. My husband had already left and was in the Netherlands waiting to meet us. And so just taking a really big risk like that and just saying, you know what, we're going to 100% upend our lives and do something totally different, because why not? And life is short. And I want to teach my children the lessons about taking risks and pursuing what you want and not letting opportunities fly by you.
Mm-hmm.
And about being like a global citizen, that, a lot of people don't get to travel all over the world, and they, it's a really big privilege to get to do this and to get to live somewhere else. And since we've lived here, I mean, partially because Europe is small and, it's like going to another country is like going to another state in the United States.
Right.
But my kids have been, in 3 years, my kids have been to like 12 countries.
Amazing.
And that's a huge education for them. And being able to prioritize that, even for this short period of our lives, feels really, really good.
Yeah, that's super cool. So I'm hearing in that if I would have met you 10 years ago, said, hey, you're going to be living in the Netherlands and running a sustainable children's clothing company, that you probably would have not seen that for yourself.
I don't know that I would have seen it for myself, but I think that other people might have seen it for me. So like when I started Jackalo, one of my friends who was my next door neighbor when I was just out of grad school had moved to Philadelphia, and I had been working at a foundation. And one of the things that I'd come across at this foundation was the amazing work of the Eugene, Oregon St. Vincent de Paul, that was employing people who were difficult to employ and pulling waste from the waste stream, like mattresses that were thrown into landfills, and turning them into new products and selling them. And I was really, really inspired by this. And I barely remember saying this to my next door neighbor, but I told her that what I really wanted to do was start a collective of women who had been like incarcerated or were otherwise difficult to employ, refugees, that would be like making children's products. And it's like I had this in my head for so long before I actually got to a point where, I'm not the one who's directly employing women who are difficult to employ at this point. But I do see that as something that's really valuable about this industry, that, these are jobs that can be really good jobs for people who are not necessarily able to get other jobs. And, to me, a good job is a good job. And that's a really big social service and a social good. And so I love the idea that, I'm doing something now that people saw the glimmers of a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the lesson there is that even when we don't see things for ourselves, getting feedback from others who love us and care about us and know us, and asking what they see for us might be the inspiration we need to, to take the opportunity or take the chance to go do something that's for us as a glimmer. I like when you're talking about that for yourself. I've also made a pivot in the last 6 months, and I've had a similar experience where I didn't really see something for myself that other people had always told me, and I
Mm-hmm.
finally kind of like manifesting that for myself as well. So I think there's a
Yeah.
something for our audience to consider. If there's that glimmer that you have, ask for feedback from others who know you and care about you.
And also I think there's the flip side of that, that like a lot of people will poo-poo your dreams, and that they may not be your target audience. You know, they may love you in certain ways, but not be able to love you in that way and support you in that way. And so, you know, when you are seeking feedback on your ideas, you know, if people are not supportive, don't let that derail you. That
Mm-hmm.
you can still move forward and still do good, even if people don't believe you. Um, but yeah, value the people who do and see the great things that you could do, and like use those people as your support and network.
Yeah, that's awesome. Next question, and you've been sharing this throughout. So maybe look something for either to get a little bit deeper on something you talked about, or if you'd like to share something new, like what are you passionate about? And so we've got Punch and Cabbage, sustainable children's clothing, travel, um, dogs, kids, uh, public health, social work. Obviously, passionate about all those things,
Yeah.
and fixing, and of course, fixing things.
I have a lot of passions. I think
That's
I'm
great.
like I'm like a jack of all trades in that regards. I get
Uh
really
huh.
excited about things, and so
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I'm a stay curious type person.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, I mean, I would say something that I'm passionate about, and this comes back to Jackalo too, and how I talk about what I'm doing is like raising better humans. You know, raising people to be like to be people that will care for the world and care for other people, that will be kind and loving, and you know, honoring the frustration in that kids are really challenging, and it's you know, having young children can be a particularly difficult period of your life. um, I loved this recent New York Times article that came out just this weekend that was talking about how like the early years of motherhood have always been hellish. You know, it's really really difficult, and you know, you need a good community. But being intentional about what we're doing to raise our children in a way that will help them make the changes that we want to see for our society.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Love that. And as a parent, that yeah, as a parent, that definitely resonates for me as well. And we're trying. It's not perfect, and it is
Nobody's
challenging, but
perfect.
yeah, we like to think we
But
are.
you know
But
what?
no, it's
I feel like the more that you just talk to your kids about what's going on, you know, I think that where a lot of um, challenges happen is when things are left unsaid. Like, oh, they'll figure it out when they get older, or you know, like they'll learn it in school or whatever. But you know, when pediatricians and developmental psychologists, etc., talk about the value of just narrating to a baby, you know, oh, I'm gonna, you
mm,
know, change your diaper now, or like, oh, we're getting dinner ready. You know, the more they hear you talk, the more their vocabulary grows. You know, that lesson carries through so much of childhood that, you know, I like to articulate my decisions with my kids. You know, if I'm making a choice to like at the grocery store to buy the thing without plastic, I'm going to tell my kid, you know, oh, this one's got plastic on it, and I'm choosing not to buy it because we can use our own bag and we can buy the one without plastic, and that's less waste.
mm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
each time I make a decision like that, you know, why does it just have to be in my own head? I can share that with my kids. And that way they start learning to pay attention to these things as well. Like the other day, my 3-year-old, when he was washing his hands at the sink, he was adjusting the flow of the water, and he was saying, I want the water to be clear, not white. Um, and what I was noticing when he told me that was that, oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I have do not disturb on, but it pops through on my computer anyway. Oh, darn
No
it.
problem. I edit it out, no
Sorry.
problem. No, it's okay.
Okay.
I'll edit it out. Won't be a problem at all.
Okay. Well, I'll start from the beginning of the story with my 3-year-old.
Sure.
So I was washing my 3-year-old's hand. My 3-year-old was washing his hands at the sink, and I was with him, and he was adjusting the flow of the water, and he said, "I want the water to be clear, not white." And I often teach my kids, like, oh, have the water be the like width of a pencil. That if you have more water than that, that's more than you actually need. But with the width of
Mm.
a pencil, that's like an appropriate flow for washing your hands. Um, what he saw in that is that when it was the width of a pencil, it was clear. And when it was higher than that, it was white. And so he's picking up in his own way how to define what the proper flow is for water. And he's 3. Like,
Wow.
kids are super perceptive.
Yeah.
Um, and the more that we articulate, the values of being kind, the values of, using resources responsibly, the more they understand it and can make those choices for themselves. And you still have the challenges at the when you walk by the toy store and you see all the toys, but you talk about the decision like, oh, we have so many toys at home, let's go home and see what we haven't played with in a while and see what we can make new and exciting.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I'm personally going to be trying some of these things with my daughter today, because I'm realizing as you're talking about this and I'm thinking about my parenting there's a lot of times I'm not doing a lot of explaining. It's a lot of
Yeah.
telling.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of explaining, like, this is why we do this. This is why this is important. And this is why you should learn to care about this, or why do you care about this, and let her actually share with us why this
Yeah.
is important to her. I think there's such a valuable lesson in that.
Yeah,
Great.
kids
Love
are
that.
so perceptive, and we can spend a lot of time. The norm is, we're going someplace and we have to get them someplace quickly, and so just do the thing I tell you to do. And that, there are always going to be times like that, but whenever you can take the time to just slow it down and say, like, let's work through this. Um, they feel respected and valued rather than, forced to do the thing that they don't want to do again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've been sharing a little bit about your philosophy as well. I'd love to get wrapping up our time, get a more general, like, give us your general philosophy on life. You can keep it, brief as you'd like, but yeah, like, what's your general operating procedure that you like to go through life with?
I kind of have 2 that really are central to who I am. I mean, one is to always be curious, to always be looking to learn something new and to understand something new, whether it's a new skill or understanding the why behind someone's behavior. And also to just leave the world a better place than, I found it, than
Mm-hmm.
we all found it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about our decisions carefully and responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think based on our time today, that those 2 philosophies are very apparent in how you operate.
They ring clear. I'm an open book.
They ring clear. Yeah, so you're very authentic to the way you live, and the things you put out into the world are very authentic to your general philosophy of life. So
Yeah,
always
absolutely. And I
alignment is
try,
good.
I think, you don't feel good if you're not living connected to your philosophy. And so, like, always circling back to it. And everybody strays, everybody, has their moments where it's like, "Oh, I'm not doing the thing that I really believe in."
Mm-hmm.
But then you come back to it. And that's when you start to feel really good again.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think the thing I'd like to share with the audience is like the future of Jackalo and the thing that I'm really excited to create for Jackalo, which is, I'm a big believer in this concept of the circular economy, that we don't always have to be using virgin resources, new resources. And the more we can make things last or make things into new things, the better. And so I'm really excited to implement this aspect of Jackalo that is that circular aspect. So from the day we launched, I have a program called the Trade Up program where we encourage families to send their outgrown Jackalo clothes back to us. And then we give them a discount on a future purchase. And then we will wash, repair if needed, and resell the garment or upcycle it. If it can't be resold, we'll upcycle it into something new or responsibly recycle it. With the ultimate aim being that, there are transparent pathways in textiles recycling, and you can work with a textile mill that will take your own worn out garments and recycle them into new fibers or into new fabrics. With cotton, you can't have 100% recycled. It becomes less durable over time, but you can blend it with raw fibers, therefore reducing the overall impact of new clothing production. And so really my aim is to, essentially make kids' clothes last forever by encouraging reuse until they can no longer be reused, and then making them into something new once that point is reached.
Interesting. Not sure if you know the statistic, but just curious about this. If you do, what percentage of clothing is actually recycled? Because I'm just trying to think.
Very little. I don't know the actual number, but I would say a very, very small amount of it is recycled in the true sense of being recycled, turned into new new fabrics. There's very, very little. I can't give a number, but I would venture to guess that it's in the 2% sort of range, if that. Very small. It's easier with poly-based because, polyester is a plastic and you just melt it and respin it. And so, like Patagonia and other companies use recycled plastics in their fleece. And that's where you do see it more often. It is growing in cotton, and you'll see it as a percentage of the fibers used. But overall, when we're looking at we could spend hours talking just about what happens to your clothes when you give them away. Because it's a huge industry, and some of it does get recycled into rags and insulation. A lot of it gets shipped off from the United States. A lot of it gets shipped off to Africa, and they do not want our clothes. It disrupts the local economy. And then a lot of it, even if you're sending it to a place that's supposed to be recycling it, a lot of times, it's just not resellable and it will end up in the landfill. So there's a lot of improvements that we can make to what happens to our clothes when we're done with them. And that's a big part of why I want people to send them back to Jackalo. I want people to send their outgrown clothes back to Jackalo because I don't want them to get shipped off to Africa. I know that I spent time working in Rwanda. People in Rwanda do not want our clothes. A lot of the recycling endeavors that are done by major retailers in the United States, these jeans, particularly it's around denim recycling. A lot of times when big businesses encourage you to bring back your jeans so that they can be recycled, those jeans still have a lot of life left in them. And if there was a proper way for them to be resold, they could be resold. It seems like a waste to me to recycle something before its usable life is done. And so those recycling programs are turning jeans into insulation. They're not making it so that other people can buy those jeans and use them again. So before you go and drop jeans off at this, this great company is doing this recycling program, really take a look at those jeans and see if they can be worn. Maybe it's just not your style. Maybe it doesn't fit you well. That doesn't mean it's not going to work for somebody else, and see if you can find a better way to part with your clothes.
Yeah, man, I am learning so much. I was just thinking about my perception is, and admittedly not somebody who knows anything about this space until today. I feel like I know a lot more about the space today. I guess my impression was always that anything that just gets thrown away just ends up sitting in a landfill. I didn't even know that there was a thing like clothing recycling. Like I know that you can give, like in our building, we have a box that you can put in, gently used clothes, and they go to
Yeah.
like the local Goodwill. But I've never even thought about like what happens when these clothes are just done, when they're not really usable anymore. And I guess I just think they just all end up in a landfill, but some things do get recycled.
Some things
I
do
didn't
get
even know that.
recycled into rags, but not if you put it in the trash. If you put it in the trash, it goes to the landfill. There's nobody, at least in any municipality I know of, and someone can prove me wrong. I would love to be proved wrong. There's nobody who's pulling clothes out of the trash to then go into the recycling system. But when you see one of these like clothing donation boxes in your building or at the gas station, sometimes they're run by nonprofits, sometimes they're run by for-profit companies. Often they do not end up with people in need locally. I always recommend the first thing to do if you want to donate your clothes to somebody who needs them, find the charity that is not the first on the list. The Salvation Army gets so much stuff. Goodwill gets so much stuff. They have so much more than they need or can resell. And when they can't fit it in their stores, which is quite often, they sell it on the textiles trading market, which is huge. But they're often like smaller nonprofits for women's clothes, particularly business clothes. Dress for Success is great. I always say, like, what's the local refugee resettlement agency? Do they need help? Do they need clothes? What about women's shelters? They always have need for women's clothing and children's clothing. Those are great places to donate that may actually put your clothes to use. And if you must put it in a box, if you're in New York, there's a great company called Helpsy that has clothing donation boxes, and they actually work with the fashion industry and pull out as much as possible to be remade into new clothes before anything ends up in the larger like textile recycling system. So they're a great company to look for.
You said Helpsy, like HELPSY.
Yeah.
I've admittedly never heard of them, but I will definitely look them up, and I'll include them in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff today. I personally learned a lot. I'm sure the audience is going to learn a ton. And I want to give the audience an opportunity to know more about where we can find you. Like, where can we find Jackalo? Just let us. How can we find out more, and where can we find you?
So you can find us at hellojackalo.com, and Jackalo is spelled Jackalo. And on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, everywhere, we're Hello Jackalo. And that's where you can find us online.
Yeah. And you're obviously looking for people to follow you, comment. We talked about earlier, you love to interact with your
say hello.
raving fans and customers. And so definitely, those listening, definitely connect with Hello Jackalo. I'm connected on Instagram. It's a great page, and definitely say hello. Yeah, so wrapping up for today, I'd love if you would leave us with some words of wisdom. And just to caveat that statement, you've left us with a lot of wisdom today, but looking for one or two sentences on something that people can take away today. To, like I said, it's like your poster on the wall that you can look at every morning. What do you have for us?
So this is not my quote. I believe it's Vivienne Westwood, but it's buy less, buy better, make it last. Or maybe she said buy less, choose well, make it last. But either way, buy less, choose well, make it last. That's something that I would love for people to leave this conversation thinking about.
Well, thank you, sir, very much, Marianna, for being on today. It was an absolute delight to have you share all the wisdom, what you're up to, your journey. Just again, I have to say it again, like the education I got around this industry that I know nothing about I feel like I could actually have a real conversation about this now more than most people. And I just want to thank you for the time today. It's been an absolute delight to speak with you. And
it was a pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess where you are in the Netherlands, it is getting dark now, I believe. It's 5 p.m.
The sun it is 4:00 right now. The sun is getting low in the sky. We are very far north, not as far as Scandinavia, but yeah, it gets dark early.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Thank you. Bye.